Welcome to Inside High School Sports Caravan, week number 2. Todd Schumacher, John Edwards, and Todd. Last week we were at Kirkwood High School, and Chaminade picked up a huge road win here in week number 1.
Yeah, big win for the number 1 team in Class 5, and it really was a battle of two heavyweights. Kirkwood came in. On paper, you thought, they're kind of young on the defensive line. How would they handle it? And they really hung in there tough, and only a one-scored, gap there between the two teams.
A lot of upsets in week number 1.
Mm-hmm.
One really that sticks out for us in the St. Louis area was John Burroughs loses to St. Dominic.
Yeah, that was a big surprise having the top team, fall in week 1, but give credit to St. Dominic. So they know how to control the ball. We've seen them in past years, and they know how to control the ball on the ground. But a factor in that game was it was such a long lightning delay that that kind of can throw you out of your groove there, and Burroughs takes the first loss.
Next week, our game this week will be Eureka and Francis Howell. Our game next week will feature MICDS and Lutheran South. Lutheran South picked up a big win over Roosevelt in a game that was held up due to lightning delay. They were winning 53-0 when they suspended play, and eventually the Lutheran South picks up the win with the final score of 53-0.
Yeah, good win for them. They go with their running back, and they're going to shove it down your throat. And Roosevelt just overwhelmed last week by those guys.
And then finally, Class 4, Webb City, a team that's been in the state championship as many times as I can remember over the last 10 years or so, loses last week to Carl Junction.
Yeah, Carl Junction gave them all kinds of fits in the semifinal, state semifinal last year. So, Carl Junction probably felt like they had some unfinished business. And, it kind of, Kearney beat them in the state final. And I think teams are kind of starting to understand, we can beat these guys, but it takes a lot of hard work. And, kudos to Carl Junction to get that win.
Webb City runs the veer, and eventually teams figure out how to defend it. And that's what we saw last year in the state final when Kearney defeated Webb City. And also, you had to look at it, too, that Webb City may have defeated themselves a little bit. Turnovers hurt them, and that's a team that's uncharacteristically giving up turnovers especially.
Yeah, these kids are learning this veer, concept, and it's a program from the time that they're in junior league and all the way up through. So it's very consistent and even flow, but, anybody on any given day can lose.
This week, we'll have Eureka and Francis Howell at Francis Howell. Eureka comes off a big win in week number 1. They win 44-7. Their quarterback, Jake Verschoor, 16 of 34, 222 yards on the week. This is a team that they have a second-year head coach after Farrell Shelton leaves to go to Kirkwood. And Eureka, when Farrell Shelton left, they had pretty full cabinet full of players.
Yeah, they really did. And, Jake Sumner is a coach that, comes in and he does have a lot to work with. And, Eureka was just so dominant in that game last week against, West that, they're going to go to the ground. They're going to, they can pass, but, with their talented running back that they have, it's a situation where they can control the ball and they can control the clock.
It's going to be a battle of the offensive lines, and we saw a lot of that last week. The trenches play dictated early what was going to happen. I think we're going to see a little bit more of that here again this week. If you look on the other side of the football for Francis Howell, first-year head coach Corey Snyder taking over for Brian Cook. His cupboard, they'll always have a full allotment of players. We've seen over the last couple of years, from freshmen all the way through varsity ball, they've had over 100 players in their program. But one of the names that's missing moving into this year is there's no Perkins in the lineup, and we can't count how many years back. It's been at least 4 that I can recall that there's been a Perkins in the lineup, but this is the first year in which there isn't one.
No, and that's a big thing because those guys were absolute studs. You talk about aggressive leaders. That was what the Perkins family was about, and we had the luck to be able to see that over the years. But Corey Snyder comes into a program that is so well developed. You talk about Webb City. Francis Howell is a great feeder program. The middle school is always feeding. Terry Black, our friend, always talks about, that 8th grade team. They're tough. They're going to be coming up and feeding that varsity team here in a couple years. And he's right. They've got a system over there, and so Corey Snyder did well at Westminster, and he's got a full cupboard here at Francis Howell.
Dean McGuire, the starting quarterback at Francis Howell last week, 10 of 20, 186 yards. He had 3 touchdown passes in a 34-21 win over Melville. 2 wideouts with 80 yards plus receiving. So a little bit different of a difference of an offense this year. It looks a little bit more spread out this year versus last year because it was ground and pound over the last couple of years. You go back a couple of years, Connor Flynn was running the ball.
Yep.
It seemed like every other play last year, Perkins would have the ball. They weren't throwing the ball nearly as much, but Corey Snyder had a lot of success at Westminster, kind of spreading the wealth.
Yeah, and I think that's what Francis Howell has to do, is really spread Eureka out, because they don't have a guy that you say, like one of the Perkins, that you can go to in the crunch and over a long period of time. You know, my concern with Francis Howell is Jabari Shelton from Melville had, 3 touchdowns, almost 200 yards against Howell. How do they handle Eureka's running game and their feature back? That's going to be a big factor in this game.
Adjustments are big from week 1 to week 2. We'll see that happen here over the next few weeks, actually, because the season starts, and a lot of teams didn't get a lot of time against other teams. So I think in week 1 you may have seen a little bit of a difference, especially like our game. We saw a lot more defense than we did offense, and it seemed like in the games last week for Eureka and Howell, we saw more offense than defense. So I'll be very curious to see if things kind of level out for both teams here in week 2.
Yeah, it should be interesting because, the first couple of weeks you're ironing out the wrinkles. You're trying to get, into the groove where you're not just practicing against each other, but you're going up against other games. So, a lot more flags, kind of, maybe, in our game, not as much offense, but I think, this matchup should, on paper, they look pretty even.
For Todd Schumacher, John Edwards, we'll see you Friday night as Francis Howell and Eureka battle it out.